Welcome Cass Pendlebury from Alphacrucis University College to the Teachers Lounge Teach, Lead, Inspire podcast, kicking the can around with edu-chats that we often don't get to have, inspiring you, our listeners, to teach well, lead well and inspire. Now, straight off the bat, Cass is here in the Northern Territory holidaying and also poking around some schools that are piloting and running what we call the Teacher Training Hub, which is training pre-service teachers with best practice, embedding them in the school system from day one. Now, they've got a mentor, teaching opportunities, tertiary guidance, support of a cohort, and contextualized culture learning that you don't get with the run-of-the-mill, off-the-shelf Bachelor of Education. So lots to unpack, but first, I'm going to introduce Cass, and one thing I notice and love is Cass's passion for education. So I'm going to hand it over to Cass, but who is Cass and how did you land in the education space?
Thanks, Ben. That's a very good question. So I landed initially in the education space out of high school and did a Bachelor of Education and Bachelor of Arts and Diploma of Education at Macquarie University a long time ago in the previous century. And hard to understand now, but when I finished my degree in 1984, there were no jobs for English and history teachers in the local or nearby vicinity. And I'd actually taken a year off uni and worked full-time in HR. And so I finished my degree, but ended up going straight into human resources consulting. 20 years later, I was operating as an international management consulting, and it's a long story and I won't go through it all, but a bit of a miraculous rescue from the Bali bombing. And I was praying actually the day after the bombing. My children and I were there, and God very clearly said to me, I want you back in education, I want you back in a church, and I want you back in a Christian community. So I guess it wasn't really my decision, it was His ultimately, but I did obey and I'm very grateful that I did.
So you're working towards a doctorate, and obviously you don't wake up and just get one handed to you. Is there a journey you can tell us from bachelor to doctorate and why you chose maybe that specific topic for your doctorate?
Yeah, certainly. So as I said, did the bachelor's, went into human resource management consulting, always had a real passion for what we would now call wellbeing. Back there it just fell in the HR wheelhouse. And I started an MBA while I was working in Indonesia. And then when God called me back into education, I quickly transferred that to the Masters of Leadership and Management in Education at Newcastle University. And whilst doing the Masters, I chose a dual pathway of coursework and research. My final mini thesis was actually on, interestingly, an apprenticeship model for teacher training 20 years before teaching school hubs happened. So it probably was the pathway more towards the current career than it was to the PhD. But I spent 10 years nearly, or more than that, in Christian education and 7 years as the Executive Officer for Christian Schools Australia in New South Wales, looking after over 40 schools and principals particularly, and really was impacted by the level of burnout and what we would now call ill-being of many principals in those schools. I used to laugh, well, it's not funny really, that Friday nights I'd get myself settled after work, I'd have a glass of red in my hand, there'd be a phone call and somebody on the line in tears. So that really prompted, I actually had always said I didn't want to do a PhD just for the sake of doing a PhD. I would do it if God called me to do it. And I can remember having a conversation with the Lord one day and going, somebody really should do something to fix this burnout problem with leaders, particularly principals in Christian schools. And he said, well, that would be you. I thought, right, okay. So the PhD journey, I was very blessed to be given a scholarship from Avondale University. And my topic is looking at spiritual well-being and spiritual practices as a possible antidote to burnout. So not studying burnout itself, but looking at solutions, which probably comes from my management consulting background. I'm not interested in pulling the problem apart. I'm looking at pragmatic, practical solutions to help.
That's really fantastic and also interesting. And we've got quite a few listeners that have a faith background, some that don't. And sometimes we replace the word spirituality with mindsets or different words like the person of me. So entering this kind of space, was there any leadership roles or opportunities that you were eyeing off? Or was this doctorate journey more of a personal interest whilst trying to address this rancid burnout issue, if that makes sense?
I am of a mature age. And I've had my leadership journey. I was general manager for an organisation. I've been a senior management consultant internationally. So it wasn't a career move to do the PhD. It was really wanting to do the research and look at these possible solutions for that space. And that was really my motivation. So I guess it was not a personal motivation, it was another motivation. And I think because of my HR background, I knew that I was very familiar with the wellbeing, psychology, leadership development space, so I could bring that to the PhD as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it actually rolls into a couple of the other questions we have, and we'll get there definitely because the listeners have definitely chimed in asking questions, wanting to know answers about why is there teacher burnout? How can we stop this? Is the concept of we're offering all these incentives, but is that the answer or is that a Band-Aid to something else that we're completely not addressing? That's not a question, but while you've been around, you've definitely seen some stuff internationally, nationally, localized, faith-based government. It's all there. So there's definitely a lot of what I call rhetoric. So media, parents just complaining over a barbecue, the news about what we call the teacher crisis. Do you buy into that? And what does the nation mean when they say teacher crisis? What's your thoughts in that space?
Good question, Ben. I think what the nation or the pollies mean by the term teacher crisis is shortage. It's an economic measure of we don't have enough teachers for the growing population. We also have a school shortage. I think the crisis terminology alludes to the burnout issue. And obviously it's not just in leadership, it's in teaching as well. So I think they're actually two separate things. And I think the crisis has helped exacerbate the shortage. But the shortage is also because people were not choosing to go into teaching. It was not seen as a glamorous, viable career option economically or perhaps even, professionally. I think that is starting to shift because of the crisis, which is really ironic, but it is starting to shift. And we have to address the whole image of teachers as professionals, and we have to make it a much more attractive profession and vocation for people to be able to step into.
There's lots we could sidebar for the rest of the afternoon on that one. But I'm just going to go through some other questions. So through this medium of social media, LinkedIn, and that space, there's lots of chats that I've had with teachers and leaders about how teaching has changed over the past, you could call it 50 years, 20 years, 2 years even since COVID. So behaviours, as in student behaviours, expectations in the classroom and outside as well, administration tasks. And a key question that I haven't found an answer to, and perhaps in the academic world and experience there is an answer, but what would you say has changed, and why are thousands, almost countless of teachers saying the same thing about teaching has changed? And they're ultimately leaving. So what would you say has changed and why are teachers packing up, shifting careers, out they go?
Okay, good question. Now, I'm going to put a caveat on this first up. I haven't taught for over 10 years myself, so I haven't been in a classroom situation probably, over the period of rapid change that we've seen in the last 10 years, but I have been working very closely with teachers. I think there are a couple of levers that we can see at play. I think the rise in diagnosis of behavioural issues, learning difficulties, the multiple handles that can be attached to that has made classroom management, behaviour management, individualised plans, all of that has added to the load for teachers. Why that is, it'll probably be like smoking. We'll find out in 20 years' time. We all have our suspicions, but the evidence will be there a whole lot later. I think on the administration side, and this is something I can speak to because I've worked very closely with regulation authorities in New South Wales and the ACT, the regulations have just been getting bigger and harder and more complex in an attempt to professionalise the industry, but it's actually had a whiplash effect. In that teachers don't choose to go into teaching to be good administrators. They choose to go into teaching to work with children or to teach subjects or, because they have a passion for education. And I think that has been an enormous load. And I know a lot of the more mature teachers have left the industry because of that, on top of behavioural issues too. And I think the expectations question, I think particularly in independent schooling, we have a very consumerist approach to education now in this country. I pay for what I want, and if I'm paying you, I get what I want as a parent. And I think that has been very challenging for a lot of teachers as well. And it didn't exist in a previous generation. And it certainly didn't exist in the public system. Maybe it existed in the private system, but it wasn't as obvious or widespread.
It's really, again, lots to unpack in that, but there's distinctly been a change. Yeah. Now, I don't want to steer the ship in the wrong direction and discourage people from
absolutely.
education. But again, there's many teachers looking to get out. I'm in quite a few different Facebook groups, and the ongoing joke is I almost keep on borderline getting kicked out of the Facebook groups for promoting the podcast. So I started my own one. And there's a lot of questions. So we've got a few hundred listeners chiming in. Now, statistically, I don't know what the statistic is, but there's going to be teachers in there that are looking to get out of the career. Is there a word or piece of encouragement that you could essentially offer here and now, other than, it's so rewarding, it'll be great, you'd love the kids. Is there a piece of advice to kind of help shift that rhetoric of teaching's bad or it's really hard, to encourage them to hang in or stay in there? So you see thousands of teachers every year. What's your encouragement that you could offer now to them?
Without using the cliched phrases, teaching to me is not just a job, it's a calling. And to be good at it and for it to be a sustainable career, you need to press into that calling. It's a vocation. It has its challenges. Every job has its challenges. I've worked in a number of different roles. They all have their challenges. But the thing I think I loved most and still do about teaching, I'm still a teacher, I just teach adults now, about teaching, is it is the only career role that I've had where you get instant gratification, where you see the lights go on and somebody understand and learn something new or engage with something that they have never engaged with before, and you see joy. And I think there are very few roles where you get that instant feedback, and teaching is one of those.
Right, here's a new little little segment for a quick sponsor grab. I'm actively looking for a show partner to come on board the wild ride of the Teachers Lounge, maybe A-Mart. That would be fun. But meanwhile, please punch a 5-star on Spotify and jump into the Facebook group Teachers Lounge, Teach, Lead, Inspire, and, like all the posts, throw some comments, questions in, that'd be great. But this is a space for a sponsor to jump in and really support and sponsor and drive the show forward. Yeah, and there's a lot of mindset shifting, I think, that needs to happen. And I've done a couple of podcasts on school holidays and the term break and how entering that with the right mindset and the right words can build you up for success. So a lot of our teachers are almost, I don't want to use the word burning out loosely, but they get to the end of the term just carrying their sorry bodies over, crying, bleeding, and they get to the break. But that shouldn't be the case. So how do teachers, and I'm drifting off here, but how do teachers get to the end sustainably into that what I call term break? And it's been quite a divisive.
Not a holiday, yes.
It's not school
It's
holidays.
not a holiday.
But dichotomically going into that, yes, there's a holiday restoration period to restore, but there's also a carved out preparation time to set the term up well so you don't carry a sorry butt over the finish line half dead. So in that, and I don't know where I was going, but we'll just go with it. Another question I have, Cass, is, again, there's a lot of commentary around the system's broken. The education system's broken, and you can take your university hat off and speak candidly. But for you, in your experience and what you see daily, and even internationally, what needs to change to shift that to the system's great, with the premise of perhaps the system is broken? And I'm not speaking for anyone here. What needs to change for people to say the system's good?
Okay, you've got 2 questions there.
I do.
So I'm going to break them up and do the first one. First one first. And the premise, the theory premise of my PhD is actually sustainable theory. So sustainability doesn't just apply to what you put in what rubbish bin. It applies to how we live our lives as well. And I think teachers, and this is not a criticism, in many cases are their own worst enemy because they don't put in boundaries. They don't switch off. And I'm not saying there aren't huge expectations. There are. But I think putting in place some of those well-being measures, some of those spiritual disciplines, if you want to call it mindfulness, can really help with that not falling over completely at the end. And it is a bit of a industry joke that everybody hits the break with, illness because they have, hit the wall by the time they get to the end. So I think building in some practices and some mini breaks, and we all know marking and all the rest of it happens, but I think the concept and the practice of Sabbath, God had a very good reason for saying you need to not work one day a week. And it was to do that refreshment and rejuvenation on a regular basis, not wait for the school break to do it. So that's number one.
Right.
Number 2, the system is broken. You could say that about any system.
This would be a presumption position that we hear often, more often than not.
Yes.
So presuming that's true, which it
I wouldn't say
be.
it's not that the system is broken. I think the system is outdated, and the system is built on a structure and outcomes from a very different time period, from an industrialised time period, from a vocation focus to education, and we've seen an enormous shift over the last 20 years particularly, and the education system, for want of a better word, in Australia has not kept up with that. And I think then now is the time for some change to happen. And if you're looking at going into education and you have an innovative approach and you have a strategic way of operating, this is the ideal time to come into education, because we are going to see some fairly fundamental changes, but it is going to take the breakdown of some of those system foundations for that to happen.
That makes a lot of sense. And I like what can we do to change, or how do we change the system? Well, perhaps not, but there's things you can do, such as taking those mini Sabbaths. If you want to call it something else, that's fine, whatever. But the concept of taking, just drop Sunday, maybe not Sunday.
Or Saturday.
Or Saturday. Or Friday, clock off for beers, and then Saturday afternoon, pick it back. The purpose is having a break. That is the change that you can do to set yourself up for success, and not just punch on for 10 weeks, 24/7, and half wreck yourself in the process. That's really good. Now, I've got a big question. I'll jump to that later. It's about dreaming for the future. What is the edu scene for the next 5 to 10 years that you see? It could be exciting, but if you could dream, what would that look like? But before we do, I've got some questions straight from the Facebook group. I won't say which one because I'll probably get booted out. But we have someone called by the name of Brooke, and she has asked, I'm sorry, they're not prepared. It's just
That's right.
Point and shoot. But what factors do you think have influenced the change in behaviour and attitudes of students in today's classrooms? The backing story to that will be the premise that teachers are dealing with just immense behavioural issues and immense attitudes compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago, stopping teaching. So what factors influence behaviour and attitude, the poor ones, I assume, in today's classroom?
Okay, caveat here. I'm not an expert on behaviour management, nor on, the change in education over the last 20 years. But I think there's been a breakdown in societal structures. And I think the foundations of how you behave and regulating yourself and dealing with others have not necessarily been there for these generations that are coming through now. And I think we're seeing too, more and more, the expectation is on schools to do what would have been done in families or family groups or communities in the past. And so we've got kids coming through schools now who have not had those foundational regulation skills, have not had environments where that's modelled, and therefore are now in the laps of teachers to handle.
It's a multi-layered issue, I imagine, that's been prolonged, exacerbated, and needs a real reform. And I don't think it can happen, but essentially for families to come together. It's quite simple in a very, I don't want to call it broken society, but fractured is probably a better word, but a whole lot of different family situations, and there's no one answer to fix that. But again, if we're looking at one thing, it would be spend time together, communicate, and dialogue.
And community. I'm old enough to remember when it wasn't just your parents who told you what to do. It was neighbours, it was extended family, it was close friends. There was a real sense of being the village, bringing up the child.
And sometimes those permissions can be a bit closed off nowadays.
Yes.
Thanks. Another question about teacher retention. Nick has chimed in and said, you may have talked about this already, but what are the top 3 or one thing that could improve experienced teacher retention over the next 3 to 5 years?
Good question, Nick. I think the government's addressing the salary issue, and I think the equity with other professions in terms of salary is big tick. Well, it's not equity yet, but it's moving. I think too, it's something I noticed having been out of teaching for 20 years and worked in big organisations, coming back into education and seeing the lack of administrative support and any kind of human resource management support, whatever you wanted to call it, in schools. So taking some of that load off teachers from administration perspective and also giving them additional supports in terms of how they manage their work.
So it sounds like a leadership overhaul and a restructuring of how do we lead teachers but also let them be autonomous in their approach to classroom practice.
I mean, we still have a very hierarchical, industrialised model in schools of organisational design, and it needs to change.
Absolutely.
It needs to change dramatically.
And that in itself has been a common thread in the dialogue. Again, needs to change, and it does. Essentially, but we'll park that one there because we could keep talking.
And we can say that it's starting to change with the hub teaching school model too, actually.
Yep, traineeship style, embedded learning while you're studying. It's the way of the future. Cherie or Sherry Vic has chimed in. It's a long one, so let's catch this one. I'd be interested in knowing how many lecturers or academic staff at, not specifically your uni, but unis in general, have recent lived experience in the mainstream classroom, brackets, with all of the challenges. When I was at uni, I had a lecturer who hadn't stepped into a classroom in over 30 years. So, one, do you think that it's problematic that, again, presuming that a majority of lecturers haven't been teaching recently, and should, in your opinion, lecturers be very recent out of the classroom or just have that exposure and relevancy, basically?
Great question, and I can speak to our context at Alphacrucis. We have intentionally employed lecturers who are still in classrooms. And we've done that so that they are aware of the current situation in classrooms, current curriculum, current practices and pedagogy, and that has been a conscious decision over the last 3 years to I wouldn't want to say roll out, most of them retired, older lecturers who have not necessarily had current classroom experience. And it's also been part of the TEEP recommendations. So we were a bit ahead of the curve to do that now. But absolutely, you know, you need to be working with lecturers or teachers or whatever we want to call them who have current experience.
And not that it's a disservice for these experienced teachers who haven't been in the field for a while. There's still amazing stories, anecdotes, experience. So we're not going to discredit, redundant teachers. That's not the case. But it would be concerning if universities aren't creating that succession plan. That's the one. If they weren't creating a succession plan of fresh lecturers coming in and making it attractive as well as a viable maybe exit strategy or something for teachers.
Or an additional stream or...
Yeah. Very good. So thanks for that question. One more off the group, and then I'll unpack the really big one. This one's about AI. And we were talking about this earlier off the show, but Michelle Sheridan has asked, how are they, and I assume universities, considering catering to the system restructure with incoming of AI? How long do they believe we will hold on to the crumbling ancient ways of assessment and reporting? When will we start considering what our children actually need out of an education? There's a bit of cynicism in this question, but maybe just the first bit. How are unis catering to AI and making sure that assessment and reporting is the crumbling ancient ways is not redundant, I suppose? What modern ways using AI? I don't know, read into that what you will, Cass, but AI in university.
But again, I think this whole AI debate has actually fast-tracked what really needed to happen anyway. So we are changing our assessment priorities and the way we assess and making it more practical, more accessible for students. And I'm old enough to remember when the internet came in and the drama that there was around this new thing that was going. The Luddites were all having panic attacks about what was going to happen. And of course we know there have been issues, but ultimately it's been a resource that we all use now daily. And the same thing will happen with AI. I think we're in that interim space of just working out the boundaries of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. For me, the fundamental thing is that I'm marking a student's thinking. not somebody else's or a machine's.
Mm.
And so if I can see in whatever form that is, whether it's a practical demonstration or whether it's creating something or whatever, that this is, I'm actually looking at the students thinking, then to me that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and everything about education, whether it's tertiary, secondary, primary, early learning, it's the centre is the student.
Absolutely.
So even as a primary teacher, the centre is the student. Tertiary, if they're in a teacher training hub traineeship, it's still a student, the student. And how do we support, bring out, draw out their best so they can be excellent at year 6 or year 12 or whatever it is. We are winding up our time, but a really cool question that I would love is looking at any kind of extracurricular or missional kind of work that goes or transcends even education. So framing the question is, have you been able to do any quote unquote missional work or overseas charitable work in your education journey? And I assume there might be some life-changing elements in that space, but can you tell us about any anecdotes that stand out to this missional work that you may or may not have done?
Thank you, Ben. This actually segues beautifully with my passion for education and the concept of it being a vocation and a calling beautifully. I've been really blessed to work in the Philippines and Cambodia in a, for want of a better word, missional capacity, helping train teachers. In the Philippines, it was training Christian educators through an organisation called New Hope International, and that was incredibly rewarding. We were actually working at a school that was in one of the worst slums in Manila, and there were quite a few life-changing experiences there, some of them quite horrific, so I won't talk about those. But seeing teachers suddenly grasp, teachers who'd come from an environment of purely rote learning, and that was the way they taught, suddenly grasp the concept of students being children of God and all created with talents and gifts, and it was life-changing for the students we were working with. And then working in Cambodia, we were actually working with the public school teachers, but as a Christian organisation with Samaritan's Purse, and running a conference and training teachers in Cambodia. And again, seeing the shift for them in Cambodia is not just rote learning, it is a set, not just a curriculum, but a set daily plan of you do this at 8 o'clock, you do this at 8:30, you do this at 9. Wow. So very rigid. And we actually worked with game theory with them. And we're working with the primary school teachers, teaching them how to use games for mathematics. We had, I think, about 5 principals and their staff in the group, and we used something so simple. It was just but you've never seen anything so funny as a room full of principals and teachers suddenly discovering you could use to teach mathematics.
You would have thought.
It was fabulous. So that kind of sudden, as I said before, it's that light bulb moment you get as a teacher of seeing them realise that they could think outside the square and they could help their students to understand these mathematical concepts in an entirely different way.
That's brilliant. Would you encourage the teachers listening in to kind of pursue or seek out some experiences that are outside of their what is it, 9x9 little box in the middle of Australia or whatever it is?
Yeah, absolutely. They taught me as much as it was we were there to teach them. They taught me about community. They taught me about caring. They taught me about the love of all children, no matter what their backgrounds were. And it was a fabulous experience both in the Philippines and Cambodia.
That's brilliant. I have been once to Vanuatu, and again, a quote-unquote mission education trip where we served a small community, but it was a faith-based school, transition to 12 or just the kindies, trindies. And it was amazing, the community that we were exposed to. I just do not see it here in Australia. And so as much as we think we're going over there to help them, it's actually flipping the equation. They were actually training us in how we can do community much better. It's like the focuses and the things we deem important. In hindsight, you go, oh, well, it's actually people that are important. And they model that exceptionally. Deficits in some area about pedagogy and how to do education, but people first, I say. So missional exposures are brilliant if you get the chance. If you could dream any dream for Australia, the education space, what are the schools doing? Post 2030, 5-10 years down the track, how are schools employing? What are schools doing? What's the education scene look like? Is it what it is today, which is the same as 100 years ago? Or have we shifted or still in the rut? Unpack that. What would you dream for Aussie education?
Good question. I would dream that education was not just focused on vocation, on getting a job, that there was an element of education that was still focused on learning to think. I think that is something that no AI will ever be able to take away from us as humans, that we have inbuilt creativity and we have inbuilt high cognitive thinking abilities. And I think that is the space where we can really make great inroads in education. I would like to see our schools really operating much more in that community way that we were just talking about, that we saw in working overseas. And I think the hub model, the teaching school hub model, is really growing teachers in that close-knit community where they don't just learn from university, but they learn from watching and being in and participating and engaging in a culture, in a school with students and parents and the wider community. And I think we really need to break down those walls around parents, students, wider community, and bring those in. And I know that was the original vision for the teaching school hub model, was that, schools would not just become places of learning for children, but places of learning for teachers too, and extended campuses of universities, and that we were growing this new way of doing education.
So there's a big word, community, which involves partnerships. It involves being outside of the school. It involves bringing people into the school, back and forth.
Including universities. Yes.
Absolutely. Aged care, churches. It's just an encompassing thing where the school is the hub, but almost like a lighthouse beacon which shines out to their community. And whatever that looks like in 10 years, that needs to be it. Less insular, more outsular. Is that even a word?
Outsular is a good word.
I have a dictionary of Ben.
Shakespeare made up words. You can, Ben.
I'm going to add that in. Dictionary of Ben. Very good. Is there anything else? We've been going for a while, but anything else that I should have asked you that would be just important to just say and put in that public forum, or just a tidbit of information for a teacher, a leader, pre-service teacher?
I would say don't be discouraged. And if you've been called to teaching, it can be not just a rewarding career. It can be a career where you see instant impact and where you know that you are building something for the next generation, which is where your focus should be.
Yep. Going beyond yourself. Absolutely. All right, we're going to wind up, but first we do point and shoot. 5 questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. What do you like to get up to in your downtime besides studying?
Okay. I actually am a bit of a water baby. And I do something crazy called outrigger canoeing. I'm not racing at the moment because I'm finishing a PhD. But I love being out racing in an outrigger in the surf.
Great. Books are a valuable asset to anyone's life, but is there a book that every teacher or leader must jump into Amazon right now and order? What's that book?
Oh, man.
No pressure.
You're asking an English teacher to name their favourite book. That's just,
No.
that's an impossible question. Okay. I can't think of one because I've covered so many during
I've asked the question.
PhD. No, I have one that goes back to our How Not to Burn Out, and that would be one of Dallas Willard's. And they're old, but Renovare, any of the Renovation of the Heart, any of those iconic seminal texts on how to live life well by Dallas Willard, I would recommend.
Great. And a big focus of this Teach, Lead, Inspire group is balancing. I don't like to call it work-life balance. It's essentially a life balance because work is part of your life. Again, that's a podcast topic on its own, which I might do. But we're missing the point and shoot. Coffee or tea?
Coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon.
I'll go coffee in the morning and coffee in the afternoon, just a double shot. And when are you next in Darwin?
Whenever you ask me to come up, Ben.
Well, probably not the wet season. It is humid. What was it? You were in Kakadu.
Kakadu, 42 degrees. Litchfield, I think it was 41.
Ooh.
Thank God for water in Litchfield.
Yes. Well, we hope to see you hopefully in the dry season up here, touring our schools and the education space here. Well, that's it, Cass. Thank you for jumping on and doing this ad hoc campfire chat, so to speak, in the lovely Esplanade Hotel. And we will hopefully be inspired to teach well, lead well, and inspire other people. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
There we go. Thanks for listening to this episode release of the Teachers Lounge podcast. I really do hope you've enjoyed the dialogue. The information discussed today was just that, information only. It's not specific advice. If you take action on something you've heard today, it's important to make sure that you get professional advice about your unique situation before you proceed, whether that advice be legal, financial, accounting, medical, or otherwise. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or if there is anything I can do to support your teaching or leadership journey, whether it's another topic you'd like discussed or one-to-one support. If you do know someone that would benefit from listening to this episode, please remember to tell them about it, share the episode with them, or connect us on socials. I trust you're encouraged in your role, your leadership aspirations, and your ability to serve and inspire. And that's it. Go do well.